Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I welcome you to this webinar presentation on implementing an integrated business planning, or IBP, culture at GEON to improve profitability and drive growth, presented by GEON Solutions. One quick note before we get started, there will be a question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Now, there is a renewed focus by companies today on cash flow and margins, which has upped the pressure on supply chains to eliminate waste and uncover new value through better management of working capital. For GEON Performance Solutions, a global leader in the formulation, development, and manufacture of performance polymer products, integrated business planning, or IBP, lies at the heart of its push to focus on profitability and cross-functional collaboration. So today, we're going to learn what this transformation looks like and how it ensures that all stakeholders are aligned. With that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Richard Herrin is the Director of Integrated Business Planning for GEON Performance Solutions. What's unique about this role is that Richard reports directly to the Chief Financial Officer of this $1 billion manufacturer. Over his 30-year career, Richard has been both an IBP consultant and practitioner. He has deep experience in both demand and supply planning processes across more than a dozen companies. In his previous role, he was a director of the IBP Center of Excellence for Eastman Chemical, a $10 billion global manufacturer. Justin Seifer is Chief Marketing Officer at GEON Solutions, a leading provider of supply chain planning software. A supply chain enthusiast and marketing expert, Justin often connects with practitioners to share their stories of innovative supply chain transformation. He brings more than 20 years of supply chain specific marketing experience to GEON Solutions to help simplify complex supply chain concepts, drive marketing strategies, and connect industry leaders and influencers. So those are our speakers today. So at this point, I want to direct it to Richard. Richard, tell us about GEON, please, and the products the company manufactures and the customers that you serve.
Sure. And I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to me. I'll give you a little overview of what GEON Performance Solutions does, right? So if any of you have ever watched plastic resin being produced, right, all you'll see are little tiny plastic beads forming and collecting on a screen. You really can't do anything with these resin beads as they are, right? If you melt them, all you'll get is this gooey, hard lump of plastic. To make them workable, other materials must be compounded into the beads. Modifiers to make them either rigid or flexible, additives to enhance molding properties, colorants so you don't have to paint the molded product after it's formed. Well, GEON's a company that does this compounding, right? We're the company that links those resin beads to the end products you see and all the end markets shown here. Right? We're a global business with a complex portfolio of compounding formulations.
Okay, so the question here, is your CFO or Chief Financial Officer truly involved in your IBP process? Richard, why should supply chain leaders and companies ask this question?
Yeah. So our competitive strength lies in our ability to develop and manufacture an incredibly wide variety of performance polymer solutions, right? In all those different markets, right? Because of the complexity of that portfolio and all the end markets we touch, efficient integrated business planning is critical to success, right? IBP, SOP process have been around for quite some time now. And if you read the surveys, success has been pretty hit and miss. For those that have been successful, a common denominator seems to be heavy involvement of finance in the S&OP process, right? So is your CFO is your Chief Financial Officer truly involved in the process? By truly involved, I mean the CFO is viewed as the primary owner of the executive review meeting, and that the CFO feels that each one of the review steps in the cycle are providing the information that he or she needs to gauge, are we on track to hit our quarterly and annual cash flow commitments? Right? Is the output of your S&OP process a cash flow forecast that clearly identifies the risks around achieving that cash flow, and it identifies the levers around revenue and spend that you have available to adjust. Right? If it doesn't, I challenge that maybe you aren't really doing IBP.
Okay, so let's demystify IBP. You know, we talk about the nirvana state of IBP, kind of balancing trade-offs, but what about the outcomes? How should the audience think about these trade-offs? And should we consider what the outcomes are of our decisions are? And also, Richard, how does GEON think about these types of outcomes?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So for GEON, yeah, and anyone who's truly doing IBP, you're trying to balance all your operational activities against real world demands so that you can achieve a financial profitability, right? To do this, we need the ability to model the impact of all the trade-off decisions we have to make in achieving that balance. All the trade-offs based on our constraints in our operations and our inability to predict the future.
I think we may have just gone into a little pause there.
Looks like Richard might have frozen a little bit. You're having a bit of a glitch. See if we can give a second to get back. Well, you know, while we're waiting for Richard, maybe he needs to go out and come back. Justin, maybe you could comment a little bit. Wait, Richard, you back now?
My apologies. Yes, I'm back.
That's all right. You know, we were talking, we just lost you just as you were talking about these optimized income outcomes. So
yeah,
you can just pick up from where you were. That'd be great.
Oh, I'll say, yeah. So everybody trying to do IBP, you're trying to balance operational activities against real world demand so that you can achieve a financial profitability, right? To do this, you got to have the ability to model the impact of all the trade-off decisions you have to make based on the constraints within your operations and on your inability to precisely predict what's going to happen in the future, right? Questions on how do we shape customer demand to maximize margins? How do we maximize profit velocity to improve our returns on our assets? How do we strategically secure all the components that we're going to need to satisfy all of our final customers, right? You need to make me the presenter again. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. And of course, unintended consequences happen and take many forms these days, don't they?
Yep.
So Richard, let's talk about unintended consequences from the standpoint of IBP. You know, companies focus on balancing these trade-offs. And for years, we've talked about the importance of doing that. At the same time, there can be some fairly significant and unintended consequences of these decisions that ripple across the entire supply chain. So in your experience, Richard, what are some of these unintended consequences you've seen organizations face when they're not evaluating their decisions in the context of the end-to-end supply chain?
I'll give you a few seconds. Yeah, and you're right? So we've all talked about the importance of trade-offs in IBP, right? When we make our trade-offs at the same time, there could be significant unintended consequences of the decisions that we make that ripple across our entire supply chain, right? To really be doing IBP right, we need to be able to measure not only the direct benefit of our trade-off decisions, right? Are we going to increase volume? Are we going to reduce labor hours at a plant? Things like that. They've also got to be able to model the indirect costs that arise because of the decisions we make, right? We got to be able to model the complete end-to-end scenarios that accurately predict the total cash flow impact for these decisions we're making. I'll give you a couple. These are some of, these are just a few that I've dealt with recently, right? But every one of you out there, I'm sure you can add more to this list, right? Just recall any time where you made a decision and you expected a certain positive result, only, after executing, you get the surprise the decision you made didn't achieve the result because some unforeseen cost issue popped up during execution. These unintended consequences are what destroys the best laid plans you make in your S&OP process. And that's why a lot of the S&OP processes really fail, right?
And I think we really quickly before you jump on, it's important to stress that we have so many things going on, right? A lot of folks over the past couple of years have been very focused on kind of firefighting mode. Got something, got to get it done. And I kind of think of it like, car maintenance. You always kind of push it off. But if the steps you take now, that time and effort really pays dividends in the future. And those are the examples here that I think that Richard is talking about, is thinking through what will happen based on our decisions today. And I know, especially as we go into some of the challenges that you're facing and many companies are facing, it just kind of compounds that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we all deal with this, right? A good one, we're all getting into the end of the year, right? And there's this huge push to
It looks like we've frozen on Richard again for a moment.
Yep.
We'll bring him back, maybe just as a disembodied voice. That might help the.
But again, like you said, Bob, unintended consequences, right? And I think one of the things as we get into the next slide and where we start talking about the challenges, right, that many companies are facing. And I know when Richard jumps back in, he'll be able to go through a couple of these very specific examples here. When we think about that perfect storm over the last few years that have led to many disruptions, longer vendor lead times, right, that have impacted a lot of organizations around the world. And specifically, I think one of the examples that Richard was going to jump into is around government investment. And how do we plan for, there's a rural broadband funding, right, that's been passed. And for GEON, and I think you probably saw that in one of the earlier slides around the overview of GEON, one of their products that they produce are cabling, right? That sheathing that goes around cabling. So from their standpoint, it's how do the investment has been approved, but nothing has actually started happening. So you've got to think about the labor, the manufacturing capacity, the lead times to get the material you need. And those are just some of those many challenges that companies and organizations like GEON are facing.
Yeah, thank you. Richard, are you back with us
I'm
now?
back.
If you continue to have issues with your camera, we can always just kill the camera and hear you speak.
I'm going to do that.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, Richard is still with us. We're going to hear his lovely voice for the remainder of this presentation. So Justin just addressed this whole idea, Richard, of the perfect storm. Let's make sure Richard gets back control of the deck while he's talking as well. But maybe you can address this whole issue as well, Richard.
Yeah. And this is part of the perfect what I'm going through right now, right?
There you go.
Planning isn't hard enough already, right? You guys have noticed things have been different things have been happening over the last 4 to 5 years that have really kind of threw a monkey wrench into any planner's life, right? The global pandemic created a heck of a lot of disruptions, right? Political reactions to that pandemic have just been adding even more noise, right? I'm working now from a rural area and my bandwidth is spotty. You guys can see that, right? I'm anxiously waiting for our politicians to spend some of this COVID relief money to expand rural broadband, right? So is GEON, because that would be a huge boon to the wire and cable markets we support, right? It hasn't happened yet. How do we accurately plan for if and when this is going to happen, right? Labor's been a capacity constraint because of the quarantine. The way each of us have had to change our day-to-day lives has created even more market uncertainty. Market demand drivers are changing faster than ever while the supply chain complexity has increased, vendor flexibility has decreased, lead times have grown. Predicting what markets are going to do by looking at past performance now just ends up in missed sales, higher inventories, profit margin erosion, right? Planning professionals, for us, hey, our jobs have gotten a heck of a lot harder. And the old ERP systems and the spreadsheets we were using just aren't helping us plan efficiently anymore. Okay. What do we need? I mean, we need a way to link and connect these businesses together, right? Uncertainty is only going to get worse. Are we going to have another pandemic, right? What's going to happen with inflation, the cost of energy? Availability of our labor pools, right? How are we going to run our manufacturing lines going forward when everyone now kind of wants to work from home? The potential scenarios that we got to plan for are growing exponentially, and the ERP spreadsheet tool and ERP systems and spreadsheet tools are just not able to support us in quickly evaluating all the trade-offs involved in these scenarios. What we need is full planning integration from end customer to our vendors, supported by IT tools that can quickly model the trade-offs between how we choose to serve the customers, how we choose to, how those choices impact our cost structures. And we need these tools to be able to sense and alert to any deviations from the demand and supply plans, right? We need them to run multiple scenarios to mitigate those deviations and identify ultimately what's the financial impact of those scenarios on my cash flow projections. Right? What I'm describing, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. I was just going to ask you, maybe we do a little dive into alphabet soup here for a moment, Richard, because there are so many varying levels of IBP maturity, and we hear the terms S&OP, SOE, IBP. What does this look like at GEON? How are you defining IBP in the journey that you've embarked on?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I'm describing here one of the thought leaders I follow in IBP, a guy named Dean Sorensen. I highly recommend you guys on LinkedIn read some of his articles, watch some of his videos. But so what he calls the difference between tactical and strategic IBP, right? You're going to run across a lot of system providers that are offering what they call IBP solutions that are basically just a group of standalone software applications cobbled together, right? They've got a CRM feeding a forecasting system, feeding a master production tool. The master production tool then feeds a detailed line scheduler. You're in your ERP system, you're running MRP to plan all your component materials. And then once you've got these volume plans built, well, you're feeding it over to some financial application that's calculating out your cash flow statements, right? This isn't an integrated approach. This is a sequential planning process, and it often takes over a month and a half to complete, right? It's rife with data and latency issues that prevent the end analysis from being timely enough to keep pace with what's happening in the market. I kind of describe this as our holy grail. What we're looking for is picture a truly integrated process where I have a demand manager, a supply manager, and a financial analyst all looking over each other's shoulders at the same screen. They're all looking and they're all working together, and they're running what ifs around the way we service our customers, the way we use our assets, the way we price and position our products, all while almost instantaneously seeing a directional indication of how these different scenarios are going to impact the cash flow projection for the next 24 months, right? This is the holy grail of planning, right? If I could do this all in real time and I could all do it on one platform. When you realize that cash flow is how you're going to fund your ongoing business and your future growth, ask yourself, shouldn't the systems that enable our IB process really help us to make the trade-offs decisions that maximize our cash flow, right? The ability to run these scenarios and express them as cash flow is critical to getting good results out of any IBP process.
You weren't kidding when you said this is a journey, Richard. Now, you know that no one plan is the end-all plan. It solves everything. We know there's going to be adjustments, changes driven by market dynamics, and so many challenges that plague today's supply chain. So as part of the IBP process, how do you, Richard, at GEON account for these variances?
Yeah. ERP systems just don't handle uncertainty well. You really do need a planning system separate of the ERP system because ERP systems are basically just one number transactional systems. You can strive to make that one number as accurate as possible, but it's always going to be wrong. What's important and what has always been missing from the ERP systems is how wrong that number could be, right? If I try to run scenarios in my transactional system, I'll just end up pushing a lot of noise down to my schedulers, and I'll create a lot of non-value added work as they chase all that noise, right? My IBP system that I'm trying to build has got to be able to generate a range forecast, right? The range forecast could be as simple as building me a base case, a best case, and a worst case using statistical confidence intervals around a statistical forecast, right? By bringing in my sellers for collaboration, I can improve the accuracy of the range through assumption and event management around the headwinds and the tailwinds we're facing, right? Once I have these three scenarios, I can build optimized supply plans I can build an optimized plan to meet my base case, and then I can run scenarios to stress test for best and worst case, right? The result of those scenarios are going to inform me how I should make my trade-off decisions around inventory investment, capacity reservations, and they're going to tell me how I can maximize my cash flow and still meet my strategic goals.
Dynamic instead of static planning. That's some great ideas there, Richard. And maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit. You've already helped us understand a little bit about how GEON is dealing with its own challenges throughout these transformations, but help us understand a little more about how you've been able to overcome some of them at GEON.
Yeah. So how we're overcoming it, we're building a strategic IBP process, one that's going to allow us to build these plans that increase profits, decrease enterprise costs, maximize cash flows, not just maximize cash flow for us, but also for our vendors and customers. Because remember, it is an end-to-end supply chain. It's by becoming profitable partners with our vendors and customers, that's where you get true growth in profit. That's where you get true market stability, right? To do this, we got to address these challenges around our processes, our tools, and the flexibility that have kept a lot of companies from bridging the gap from tactical to strategic IBP in the past.
And I think it's interesting on that slide when we think about the three areas, right? None of these operate necessarily in a vacuum, right? You need the platform to support the processes and drive the scenarios. The systematic process ensures that you get the most out of the platform and successfully execute on the scenarios, right? They're all intertwined, just like a supply chain, right? Everything kind of dominoes onto other areas. So I want to make sure that from audience perspective, we don't look at these individually in a vacuum.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's one platform where I can pull all this together, right, and do it. It's that's a great add, Justin. Marching to one tune. I can improve my planning capabilities. It's actually a really good goal to get my planning capabilities more and more accurate. But it won't make a difference if I can't keep my tactical activities and my planning processes synced up, right? The IBP process must keep the monthly plans and the weekly plans and the daily activities, got to keep them aligned, right? Monthly planning has to be good enough for operations to be prepared for any situation that happens. And what happens on an operation level, on a weekly, daily basis, well, that's got to be rolled up and reflected into my future monthly plans, right? I've got my planning is I'm saying what I'm going to do. Well, my operations is I got to do what I say I'm going to do. So my system, my IBP system, has to keep these things aligned.
Okay, Richard, transforming from good to great as you set forth on your journey at GEON and you work with various stakeholders across the organization. How do you describe where you're going? In other words, the benefits or the outcomes to expect?
Yeah. So basically, how do we know we're going to be successful? How are we going to know when we're successful, right? And I tell everybody it's when we can accurately say what we're going to do and when we can efficiently do what we said we were going to do, right? When every month we can create an accurate directional free cash flow projection for the next 15 to 24 months. When I can continuously replan our inventory levels and our cost structures based on changing priorities and still hit our financial targets. And when I can set targets based on scenarios that quickly and simultaneously going to optimize my financial and operational constraints and give me the outcomes that I really desire.
But even though it's about the journey, it's also about results. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits that GEON has realized from this project and what else you expect to achieve.
Yeah, as far as benefit, I mean, the IBP process alone is really getting improvements in communication across the board, right? We're really implementing scenarios has been incredibly, it's opened people up as to how do we need to be flexible in our plans, right? A lot of old S&OP process, all built on one number forecasting kind of thing. They're very rigid, right? You spend all this time going back and saying, well, this was our plan, we didn't hit our plan. With what we're building out in our IBP process, it's, well, what could happen to our plan and how are we going to be prepared around it, right? We're building out much more efficient plans. We decided to partner with GEON Solutions, right? And the reasons we chose GEON were, look, overall project costs, speed of implementation, and flexibility in their tool. To me, one of the biggest benefits is they have a single platform architecture. Their tool on top of the ERP system is a very good step to getting me to a completely integrated system in the future. And I'm expecting really big things to come from this.
And I want to also kind of mention, when you think about GEON and their organization and their supply chain, it's a highly complex supply chain, right? I think Richard has done a good job, especially in the beginning, describing the breadth of products that they produce, the number of industries that they serve. And so a lot of this is also taking a look at the end-to-end process, right? And having that vision for where they need their supply chain to go, building that process, bringing together the tools, the data, the people, everything together to make that a reality. So I just want to make sure that we don't gloss over, Richard's been talking about some of the process and some of the technology, right? But there's a lot of great things that make that happen, right? It's that vision, it's the people to get it all, to bring it all together and make it actually, going back a couple of slides, right? Marching to the same tune towards that end goal.
It's a good ad,
and it's
Justin.
not just an end goal, it's a journey.
Yep, it has been a great partnership through that too, right? Each of us bringing best practices, GEON bringing best practices around business need, and GEON people bringing best practices around technology. It's been a good partnership.
Mm-hmm.
So at GEON, you've been through a lot, you've learned a lot. Richard, what advice do you have for other organizations who are working to improve their IBP process or may just be starting out?
I think we got Richard back and he froze again.
Oh, he did. Okay.
I don't know if we can.
Well, let me ask you this real quickly, Justin. I mean, you get a lot of feedback from your other customer and other accounts. Here's Richard now.
Yeah, I apologize. It's
perhaps it's better if you stay off camera, Richard, so that we can use less bandwidth. So, not that we don't like looking at your face, but just in the interest of keeping you with us, perhaps we just take advantage of the voice. Okay. Well, did you hear my question, Richard? I was asking you to, some guiding principles. What advice do you have for other organizations?
Yeah, change management is critical. Actually setting a vision and a goal and a description of this is what good looks like is critical, right? Involvement of the senior level and like we've been saying all along, look, finance has to take a leadership role in the process going forward, right? I've got some others here that you can read off of, but the kind of standard S&OP advice. Be careful, choose the right partners as you go forward, and try and keep focused on the goal that you're trying to achieve in the end.
I guess that mirrors, Justin, what you hear from your accounts too. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think we've said it a couple of times throughout the session today, but it's that considering those future consequences of our decisions and our actions now. And on this slide, we have kind of several call outs to that, right? Avoid making decisions too early or too late. It's kind of that the three little bears syndrome, right? There's one that's just perfect, but as well as don't be rash or knee jerk in your decisions, and don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. Those are two, I think, kind of guiding, I'll say, using the title of this slide, right? Guiding principles here of making sure that we're keeping ourselves focused.
Fantastic. Well, those are great insights from both of you, Richard and Justin. But at this point during the presentation, I want to move into a panel discussion where I can grill you a little bit more on some of the questions that will help elucidate the points we want to make here. Let me start with Richard here. This is kind of expanding on what you've already talked about, but what would you say were the greatest challenges that you found in moving forward with this transformation?
Oh, it's definitely the change, right? Building desire for people to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other than the change management, there's showing people what good looks like out there, right? There's not, until recently, there haven't really been a lot of good IT solutions to doing IBP. A lot of pushback I've had over the years has always been, hey, this sounds great in theory, but our ERP system isn't going to allow us to do it. Well, things have changed, right? There's been huge advancements over the last couple of years. The technology exists now to really make big leaps here.
When you talk about change management, Richard, do you find that quick wins kind of help along that as well? So again, it's you're not trying to boil the ocean, right? As you go through this, it is that process, that path, and you've got quick wins that kind of pull people in and get them excited, and they want to keep moving forward from there.
I do, right? Nothing sells like success.
The C-suite's not very patient these days, in terms of waiting forever for something to happen. And a particular aspect of the C-suite that we talked about earlier, Richard, we're going to risk having you back on camera for a moment to see if that works.
Okay.
The CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, we talked about at the very top of this presentation, being involved in the IBP process. And based on your experience, how does one ensure that happens, that the CFO is involved? What has worked and what hasn't worked to get that to happen?
Yeah. So you got to make it relevant to the CFO. In my past, everybody does quarterly callouts, right? If you're a publicly traded company, you do quarterly callouts. Most CFOs I've talked to, they'll go in and they walk in a week before the quarterly call out, and they're trying to build an explanation of why we didn't deliver. At the beginning of the quarter, this is what we said we were going to do at a quarter. Now we're getting our quarterly call out, and I'm having to explain why I didn't do that. The CFOs, without an IBP process, they just don't have the levers to control where how this is going to go, right? The IBP process, the monthly process, ought to be the one biggest source of information for the CFO on, am I hitting my quarterly targets? Am I hitting my annual targets? If I'm veering from them, here are the levers I can pull to get me back on track, or here are the explanations I need. Here's what's driving it, right? You want to put your CFO in more of a proactive, not explaining and putting out fires at quarterly calls, but more in a proactive situation where they're going in and they're actively managing what they report out. You convince them in your IBP process that, look, this should be the management tool that does this for you.
And the fact that you have the person who oversees the money on your side in your court, there's where you start to get your C-suite buy-in and able to move forward with your lengthy journey. So, that's great. Yeah. Justin, let me ask you, we talked a lot about GEON's story of transformation here, or its focus on growth, its focus on profitability. Is this focus for other companies that you're working with? How has John Galt helped other companies like GEON support their growth and profitability?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is a conversation we're seeing, regardless of company size or maturity level. We're seeing more and more companies striving for stronger alignment between supply chain and finance. I think to deliver both greater visibility, but also to accelerate decisions and have confidence in those decisions. I think that's a big point, right? It's one thing to make a decision; it's another thing to have confidence in the decision that you're making. And then we think about business or the world, right? You name it, everything is moving so much faster. So decisions have to be made faster and with that confidence. And we have to move, I think, at the pace of today, or for that matter, even the pace of what tomorrow is going to be. If I think of an example of one of our customers, besides obviously the great example we walked through today with GEON, Another one is a retailer distributor of the audiovisual electronic equipment. They have built a strong relationship between supply chain and finance to help the company thrive. As I think everyone on this webinar can relate, during the pandemic, demand for products shifted quickly. And in this case, demand for their products of professional equipment for large events shifted really quickly to work from home products, such as microphones and webcams and the like. And I think that alignment between supply chain and finance really allowed them to quickly understand the impact of their decisions as they were trying to figure out how are they going to shift their inventory, shift their relationships with their suppliers to satisfy those needs. So we definitely see a lot of conversation amongst our customers and the other companies that we're talking to about this alignment, more involvement from finance in supply chain across, I mean, whether it's industries, size, geographies, you name it, everyone's very focused on this, Bob.
Great. Okay. Well, I think at this point, I'd like to move into the audience question and answer portion of our presentation, where Justin and Richard would be only too happy to ask some of the questions the audience is already posing for us now. And even as we are answering those questions, audience members are encouraged to continue to submit questions by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And we will get to as many of these questions as we can, time permitting. So I'm just going to throw these questions out and see who wants to take them. This one is, how do you best integrate? A little bit about this, back to the finance part. How do you integrate finance in IBP processes to achieve, quote unquote, one plan?
Yeah, I'll take this one real quick. This has actually been one of the big problems to keep. This is where people get a tactical IBP versus strategic. We have different systems doing it, right? In my ERP system, I'm balancing volume, and then I pass a balanced volume plan over to my financial system, where they're two separate, right? If I could get one model, this is integration. If I'm modeling the flow of material through my value chain, well, I can attach a cost and a revenue to each of that, right? The model that I use to optimize my volume balancing ought to be the same model I'm using to predict my financials. That's what I'm going to try and do with this GALT tool is, as I run my solvers, I'm going to put a cost and I'm going to put a revenue by each activity, not low-level activity-based costing, but activity-based costing at the level we're making the decisions. Right. So I can use one platform. I can say, if I move the volume from here to here, here's the financial impact on my cash flow. Right. That's how I'm going to try and pull them together. And that has been one of the huge hurdles in the past of trying to get finance and operations together in an IBP process.
Thanks for that. We've talked a little bit about change management here. That is so essential, especially the idea of the small wins and things like that on the longer journey. But this questioner is saying, what are the key change management best practices you can recommend that were key during implementation for GEON? And I think maybe in this case, we're talking more about a psychological thing. How do you get people in line as opposed to, just how do you, buy in from everybody? What do you think, Richard?
Kaizen events work very well. One of the approaches I like we've done with the GEON Golf Solutions team is use cases, right? We go out to everybody and we tell them, give me what do you want to do? What do you need to do? What's the benefit of what you're trying to do? What's preventing you from doing that now, kind of stuff, right? We're able to actually focus people on the problems that really matter. Again, when it comes to change management, the best thing you can do is small wins, big wins. Nothing sells like success. I always do my Dr. Phil moment when I'm talking to somebody. I'll go, how is your current process work? How is this working out for you? And I go, well, it's not. All right, then how should we change it?
Justin, you must have a lot of wisdom in terms of how you help your other client base, implement change in their organizations with your solution. What advice might you offer us in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll build a little bit on what Richard was just talking about as well there, and that is and maybe emphasize a little bit, getting people involved, right? It's not a situation where you go in and you just say, this is what we're going to do, right? You need to find out, what are the business problems? What are the challenges? What do they want? Make everyone a part of that decision-making process in order to gain that buy-in. And once you start to get people as they know that they're a part of the reason for this change, they're more accepting of it. And I think understanding that full scope is key to bringing people on board.
Find their pain point and then address their pain point. That's one of the best ways to get people actively involved in the change.
Yep.
Great advice. Great advice. So, okay. So this questioner is asking, do S&OP meetings need to be done monthly? Or maybe they should be saying, do they still need to be done monthly? Or does it really depend on the business?
I would say one of my biggest learnings from last year was monthly was not quick enough. With our sequential process, it takes us a month and a half to run through this. By that time, look, everything had changed, right? We had rail strikes, we had the supply chain crisis going on. One of the things we're looking at doing is I can build out my base case, best case, worst case in a monthly, but I need to be reactive at a weekly basis. I need, for certain scenarios that pop up, I need to be able to replan them end to end and value the impact against our cash flow projection. I need to be able to do that within a couple of days in the future. And I think it's just going to get more and more reactive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the speed of way everything is going, you just can't wait to have a meeting and discussion around this every month. It's got to be something that you have the flexibility within your process to be able to adapt to what's going on in the market. If you just wait because you're like, well, it's monthly, right? Your competitor's going to be so far ahead of you. You're going to be scrambling to try to keep up.
Flexibility, adaptability, range of possibilities. I hear that as a major theme in this presentation today. So vital. So thanks for hitting hard on that one, both you guys. I like this next question because, as we all say, it does all start with data. This questioner wants to know, how is data, to talk about the data availability to support and feed the tool to create scenarios. This person is saying, my data pool at my company, whoever that is pretty poor. Old-fashioned ERP and Excel files, more than a demand supply tool. I see that hand being raised.
I think there's a lot of hands that can go up right now.
That's right. They're curious, how do you create scenarios based on the constraints that we, the questioner's company, has been facing?
This is critical. I mean, this is critical to success. The data is the lifeblood of every one of these systems, right? And 9 out of 10 of the failures you see of people who try and implement S&OP, it's because they didn't address the data. Master data management, data governance, getting control over your data is step one, primary. The John Galt people forced me into a data model when we started, right? They spent a lot of time in project readiness to say, no, let's make sure we get the data right. And it was time well spent. We're doing the same. We've got multiple ERP systems. A lot of our planning data resides in one-off ERP systems. We're actually looking at using the John Galt data model as maybe a master data hub or a component of a master data hub, where we can actually run cleansing rules, governance rules against the data. So we're collecting all the data. You have to pay attention to the data at the start.
Benefits are of little use without the ability to measure them. This is a good question coming in from the audience. What are the quantifiable KPIs or key performance indicators used in the journey?
Yeah. I have one ultimate KPI that I'm trying to get to. It's cash flow. My cash flow projection for the next 24 months. Cash flow is, this is what the revenue I'm going to bring in, and this is my spend. Cash flow is how I'm going to finance my business, and it's how I'm going to reinvest for growth into my business. The ultimate output of my IBP process should be a directional cash flow projection that's accurate, right? And again, that is highlighting to me all the risks in achieving that cash flow. That's my ultimate KPI. There, you can do a balanced scorecard down from that to EBITDA, towards return on net assets, all the other ones. But ultimately, you should roll up to, am I generating the cash I need to keep my business running?
Yeah, thank you. Give us some examples of the scenarios that you run in your IBP process.
Oh, that's a good one. I start with the basic. I'll start with a statistical forecast now. Again, the statistical forecast, that one number, half the time I'm going to be above it, half the time I'm going to be below it. 100% of the time I'm going to be, I'm not. It's going to be wrong. Use that statistical forecast, put a confidence interval around it, 90%, 95%, depending on your ABC classification. Come in with a range. This is my base case. Here's my best case. This is what could happen if everything hits right based on history. And a worst case. Here's the worst that could happen. I work that with my commercial group, and I go out and say, let's talk about headwinds, let's talk about tailwinds, and let's really refine that range. So it's three base.
We lost him for a moment there too, but he's also talking about, again, one of the big themes here that we're seeing during this presentation, the idea of the range, flexibility. And Justin, I guess the technology as it exists today is allowing companies to do a kind of what if scenario planning that just wasn't available to them before in past years. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the capability to do what if scenarios has been around for for a decent amount of time. I think the challenge has been that folks haven't necessarily always had the access to the right technology to be able to do those, and to do those at speed. That's a big thing, especially as we've seen over the past couple of years, the way that, again, going back to a comment from earlier, the speed of business, and as it's accelerating, you need that ability to model those what ifs very, very rapidly. Sometimes a lot of organizations will take the time and create those scenarios ahead of time. I think as Richard was talking about, some of those best case, worst case, baseline scenarios based on different things that are happening in the market. But if there's one thing we now realize, it's that there are things popping up at all times, right? And we need to be able to do that quickly. And we also need to be able to look at the probabilities of those actually happening. So it's one thing to talk about scenario planning. It's also important to look at probabilities and looking at those ranges of what is likely going to happen, what is likely not going to happen, and how do I respond based on what I see in the market.
Yeah,
okay.
A lot of people will try and find out, everybody will come and say, look, we got 100 different scenarios out there. And I go, well, basically you just have a few scenarios. Is volume going to increase? Is volume going to decrease, right? All the reasons behind them, you group them, and these are headwinds and these are tailwinds, right? And you can group it so you don't have to build out 50, 60 different scenarios. Under 5 different scenarios would be manageable. But yeah, just like Justin said, it's I will take my base case, I'll optimize it, I'll take my best case with all my headwinds we've agreed to, and I'll stress test that base case. Wherever I run out of capacity, that'll tell me, okay, I need to buy in capacity or I need to build inventory. Wherever worst case could happen, I measure what would be the impact on my inventory level if I did that, my idle capacity. What do I want to do? What kind of plans do I want to build out ahead of worst case maybe happening, right? I'll put my leading indicators out there and say at this point, there's always leading indicators to a scenario. And I'll put that in my IBP process as decision points as you go through each cycle of the IBP process and say, okay, we need to make a decision around this leading indicator here. Are we going to prepare for worst case, or are we going to prepare for best case?
Yeah, okay. Richard, you talked about an end-to-end platform and the benefits of that, but what if you just don't have the resources to implement an end-to-end platform? And maybe both you gentlemen could quickly address that question.
I'll tell you, that's the tactic. That's the prevention mentality. It's kind of prevent. Everybody has always said, look, I'm gonna look at my ERP system. I can't do this in my ERP system. Well, you're right. Everybody's looking at these other providers who are cobbling together standalone tools that you've got to hand off and hand off and hand off. Well, yeah, you can't really do it efficiently in those tools. What we're looking at, if you need a tool that's demand, supply, all in one platform, right? And this is one of the things that really attracted me to the Galt architecture. I can have my demand manager, my supply manager, my financial manager all working in the same tool. I don't have have them logging into different, ERP or Hyperion or something like that. And no, we're all working together. Again, the holy grail is those three: the demand, supply, financial manager looking over each other's shoulder at the same computer screen, making decisions. Hey, what if we changed how we approach this customer? What if I change how I produce this product? Hey, here's the financial impact of doing that.
Great, thanks.
And I also think that question goes back to the concept of boiling an ocean, right? You don't have to do everything at once. It's about where you are today, understanding where you are and where you want to go, and then being able to pick the right technology that'll take you along that entire journey. So when Richard's talking about that end-to-end demand, supply, S&OP, inventory, what have you, it's not that you have to go and implement that entire platform right away. You want to be able to have a platform that grows with you as you get more advanced, more mature in your capabilities, and ready to take on those more advanced opportunities for you.
I'll say low code. Low code, I think, has really made the advances here, right? In the past, everybody's, the days of these huge $10 million ERP system implementations, they're long gone. The capability is out there in the low code kind of applications, and the Gulf tool is basically a low code application.
Okay, Richard, I do want to get a perspective. Like, we're talking about where do we go from here? Where does GEON go from here in terms of even a more sophisticated approach to this topic and the opportunity to realize new business through these applications? Because that's the bottom line after all. What is next for GEON?
Yeah, so what I've described is kind of like is the journey for GEON, right? If I can get to for cash flow management projection, if I can get to that, GEON's also, we look at mergers and acquisitions. We look at the next step would be market profitability, customer profitability, product profitability, and also, who are the right people to for mergers and acquisitions, right? 1 + 1 needs to equal 3 if we want an effective merger or an acquisition. So use this IBP process to really identify where are the weaknesses in our end-to-end supply chain, and what are the right mergers or acquisitions we should be looking at out there to fix those weaknesses.
Great, thanks for that, and thank you, both of you. We're just about running out of time here. I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to give it to Justin. As we wrap up here, Justin, what advice do you have for our audience today?
Putting me on the spot. Thanks, Bob. I guess I'd say first, I want to thank Richard for taking the time to share the GEON story with the audience, taking a look at their IBP journey, the challenges that they face, how they've set out with a goal in mind, and the steps that the team has taken to get there. As we reflect on the session, I think there are 3 points that kind of stand out to me. First, we'll circle back around to the beginning, right? IBP has to have the attention and the involvement of finance. I think in today's world, this almost seems like this should be table stakes, but it's not yet, and we need to work to get it there. Second, strategic IBP requires continuous visibility, driving a self-adapting plan. Now, what I mean by that, in a world that's continuously changing, you need a plan that can quickly adapt to change, to disruptions, new opportunities, without creating nervousness across the supply chain. And then third, I'll say there are so many complex challenges supply chain teams face that it is critical that we connect data, decisions, and operations, as well as provide teams with a path to get there. And I've mentioned the idea of the journey, the path, or guide a couple of times. Now, we work closely with companies wherever they are in their journey to provide that guide, that path to get there, to help remove latency from data, bias from decisions, and take advantage of whatever's around the corner, whether it be tomorrow or maybe 5 years down the road. So as Richard has highlighted, I'll add to a single platform built on a single model is critical to the success and to keeping weekly, monthly, and long-term planning in sync without, importantly, introducing noise into the system. And I think these are all key, especially during a time when profit velocity, cash flow, and driving margin, margin are crucial. And I'll just hit back to a line or mention that Richard said earlier. Remember that today's cash flow is what drives tomorrow's operation. So if there's one thing we keep in mind from this session, is that focus on cash flow and getting back to bringing the alignment between supply chain and finance.
What a complex topic, and yet I think the two of you have done a great job presenting the nuances and the complexities and the realities of IBP today. You've taught us that it's not a button you push and it starts working any more than S&OP was a button that you pushed back when that was introduced decades ago. It takes so much to achieve this end-to-end supply chain that you're working very well toward at GEON, Richard. So Richard Herrin of GEON and Justin Seifert of John Galt. Thank you so much. Listeners, audience members, look for the following things to receive following this webinar. You'll get an on-demand replay. You'll get access to an IBP Strategy guidebook and the opportunity to schedule your live demo of the Atlas planning platform. And there is the URL to do that, johngalt.com/demo. Make sure you check that out and learn more about this topic. Thanks again, guys. Great presentation. Thank you, audience, for your participation and for your fantastic questions. It's been a real educational hour for me too. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.